Welcome to the Storycraft Cafe. Come in, grab a cup of your favorite beverage, and get ready to join the storytelling conversation. Storycraft Cafe is brought to you by Dabble, the ultimate cloud-based fiction writing software. Here we're going to bring together storytellers from all walks to encourage and empower you to craft your best story. Well, thanks for joining us again here in the Storycraft Cafe. We've got a fantastic show for you today. It's a double header with Deepa Varadarajan and Christina Dodd. We've got two different interviews. They're going to run back to back and really get those creative juices flowing for you. There's nothing like hearing from someone who's in the trenches and making it happen. And, you know, we all have a little different process, and it's fun to hear what works for some people and, you know, what might not work for them. And, you know, then to take a look at your own process and see what you can borrow from other people and, you know, what hints you can learn from. It's always great to get other input on your creative process. Thank you to Dabble, as always, for sponsoring this episode. If you want to take your writing to the next level, visit dabblewriter.com and get started writing your novel or rewriting your novel. Dabble is the very best. Thanks for joining us, and be sure to visit at storycraft.cafe so that you can be aware when we have live author interviews going on, and you can join in the conversation over YouTube or be sure to subscribe to this podcast in your favorite podcast app and never miss an episode. Hang on tight. Here comes the show. And we are live in the Storycraft Cafe. I am your host, Hank Garner. Today, I am super excited to have Deepa Varadarajan on the show with me, and she has a fantastic new book. It's called Late Bloomers, and it debuted yesterday. If you're listening to the live feed here, what an exciting time. New book releases are always so exciting. Welcome, Deepa. How are you?
I am great. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to have you. Deepa, one thing that I love to ask new people sometimes to kind of get the conversation juices started is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Yeah, it's interesting. I came to realizing that I wanted to be a writer somewhat late, I think. I really wasn't one of those people who always knew she wanted to be a writer from a very young age. And in fact, it was something that I didn't really start seriously thinking about until I was in law school. But if I do look back on my childhood, I was an imaginative kid. And I especially think when I was faced with unpleasant tasks like cleaning my room or something like that, I seem to recall coming up with stories to sort of make it all go faster. And so, yeah.
Where did you attend law school?
I went to Yale for law school.
Okay. I've met a number of writers who began their professional careers in law, and I always find one of the things I find most fascinating is the circuitous route that most of us take in our journey to become, you know, published writers, storytellers. And it's very rarely have I met an author who said, I've only always wanted to be a writer, and I had a singular focus and purpose. Most of the time, you know, we venture over here, we collect some life experience in this thing, and then we meet new people and we collect some more experience there. And, you know, this kind of story gumbo, you know, forms in our hearts and minds, and it comes out, you know, in some. So, do you see any connection between your study of the law and being a fiction writer?
Well, I can understand why there are quite a few lawyers who have turned writers, or lawyers who like to write, because I think, you know, these are two professions that tend to draw people who are interested in the written language, or interested
Sure.
in words, right? Have an affinity for language. And I would say when you are a lawyer, especially if you're a litigator, you are going to be writing briefs a lot of the time. And there's a section of every brief called the facts section. And that's your chance to sort of tell the story of your client's case. And you'll try to do it in a way that generates the most empathy from the reader, the judge. And so there is sort of a storytelling element to that, I think.
Sure.
So, I think I can see why, there are people who are lawyers may be drawn to being writers, and why people who are lawyers might be good at it. Also, I will say in law school, law professors love to pepper you with hypotheticals. So I'm a law professor now, actually. And so, you love throwing out hypotheticals to your students. And in fact, when I am writing stories, as part of my process, you're engaged in this what if I did this to
Right.
the character? What if I did that to the character? So there is this, you're engaged in these sort of hypotheticals as you're writing a story. So
Right. Right. Did you say that you were teaching law now?
yeah, I am a law professor. Yes.
Oh, nice. Nice. How is there a parallel between, other than what you said about the love of the hypothetical? Is there something that comes from teaching that kind of opens new pathways of thought and imagination?
I mean, anytime you're kind of engaged in the world and you're around other people, I think that's always an opportunity to get ideas for stories, right? So,
Yeah.
uh, and in particular, I'm around a lot of young people. I work at a very vibrant place where you encounter, lots of different types of people. So I think those interactions are always sort of helpful and just kind of getting your mind thinking about different kind of situations that people are in. And so in that sense, I think it's been
Right.
helpful.
Gotcha. Your new book that just released yesterday, Late Bloomers, is this the first novel that you had ever written?
Yeah, it's the first novel I've ever written. It took me a very long time.
As as a lot of first novels do. Yeah. Um,
Yes, you're sort of engaged in the exercise of figuring out how to write a novel
right,
as you're writing a novel.
exactly. Yeah,
Mhm.
and then you're halfway through and go, "I don't think this is how novels work," and do a lot of backtracking.
Exactly. Throw a lot of pages away, do a lot of
Right,
rewriting.
right. Well, I'm fascinated, utterly fascinated by the beginnings of novels because in uh in an artistic sense, a novel is um, similar to other artistic pursuits, except it holds a very unique and special place in that you are the creator of worlds of people inside your mind. And in one moment, the life of late bloomers did not exist in any form or fashion. And then either a character walks onto the stage of your mind, or you start playing the what if game, or maybe you observe something in your own family or read a news article or whatever it is. And then all the synapses start firing, and then the story does exist. And then it's your job as the writer to kind of dig that thing out and excavate it and polish it up until, late bloomers is held in your hands. What was that very first moment of inspiration that later became late bloomers?
Yeah, so I mean, all of the characters and situations in this book are, very much a product of my imagination, and um, that all that. But I would say the sort of very first spark
Yeah.
came about many, many years ago. About 20 years ago, I was dating somebody whose parents had recently divorced. He was Indian American. His parents had recently divorced, and his dad was beginning to try online dating. And I thought it was this really brave thing to sort of put yourself out there and try something new later in life. And at the same time, I was in my 20s, was having relationship issues like a lot of people in their 20s.
Right.
And all of these things sort of made me think, I've never read a story before about recently divorced a recently divorced Indian couple, my parents' age, and their adult children, all sort of going through romantic turmoil at the same time. And I thought, I think I'd like to read that kind of a story.
Yeah.
Maybe I could think about writing a story like that.
The
Yeah. And the other thing I should also say is I knew that I knew that I wanted to set that story in a small university town in Texas, similar to where I grew up, and that's the kind of town that I haven't seen depicted very often in fiction, especially stories about immigrant families.
it Texas is such a great setting for a story about an immigrant family. It's a non-typical setting. I've read lots of novels about immigrant families, and they take place in New York or maybe San Francisco or Los Angeles. Some of maybe the hubs of immigration in a lot of senses. Um, this is kind of an atypical setting, which I love because it really adds texture and adds something of the sort of uh, I I keep wanting to say like out of place, but not really out of place. That's the of finding a new place is maybe a better. There's a lot going on here is what I'm getting at when and the setting really adds to that. What was it like being an immigrant family in a part of the country that's not really known for these types of immigrant families to live in?
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting when you asked me before about, when I knew that I wanted to become a writer. And one of the things I've always been is a reader my entire, since I was very young.
Yeah.
And I do think, when I was growing up, I was one of few Indian American kids in my school, and sort of you feel like an outsider. And I think, like many outsiders, I was very drawn to reading fiction. I found a lot of comfort in reading fiction. And when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s in this town, we had a very tight knit Indian American community. At first, it was just a few families. Over time, it's certainly grown, and I should say the town has changed a lot. That I grew up in, the town has changed a lot in the past few decades. But in this book too, there is an Indian community represented in the book, and so, that was a very important part of my growing up and my experience.
Gotcha. The this story is not an analog of your family. Do I understand that your parents have not gone through a situation like this? Um, do you ever? Yeah, I think it's something that a lot of authors go through is people, question you. Is this your family? That how do you reflect things that you are conscious of and without necessarily being a mirror to your own life?
Yeah, so it's interesting. The couple at the center of this story, Suresh and Lata, they have recently divorced after 36 years of an unhappy arranged marriage, right? And they're each trying to start over. They're trying new things. Suresh is trying online dating for the first time. It's not going how he would have expected. Lata, she has her first job outside the home at a university library, which she loves. And a professor there asks her out on a date, which is this very new experience for her because, again, she had an arranged marriage very young. She hasn't had the experience of dating. And so, so the couple that's sort of the center of the story, or the recently divorced couple at the center of the story, has this kind of background. And they have two adult children, Priya and Nikesh, who are struggling to adjust to these changing family dynamics. And they're also dealing with their own very messy relationship issues, which they're hiding from their parents. And so, there's a lot of secret keeping and discovering secret sides of one another in this novel. In my own life, my parents actually had an arranged marriage too, but unlike the couple in this story, theirs was a very happy one. They've been married for almost 5 decades.
Amazing.
And so it's very different,
Yeah.
but kind of going back to what we were talking about before, this idea of the hypothetical, the what if. I mean, in some ways, there have definitely been times in my life where I've thought, oh, what if this had gone a different way? What if they hadn't been
Right.
such a compatible match? And so, in some ways, this is sort of an exercise. This is sort of an imaginary alternate path. This what if, right?
Right.
So, it very much is a product of my imagination, but at the same time, I wrote it. So all of the
Right.
characters are me and none of the characters are me, right? So
Right.
I think,
Exactly.
I think an author is always in all of the characters and simultaneously not in all of the characters. So
Right. Right. Um, the idea of arranged marriages is a fun um, trope, if you will, to play with, because, like you said, in your own parents, they have an arranged marriage and they're very happy. And I think the initial reaction is arranged marriages. There's no love in it. There's no kind of magical kismet kind of thing. And we all know people that are very happy. I've known a couple that said that they were so happy for their arranged marriage because they didn't have to go through all of the typical dating and all of the uh, ups and downs of all the emotions and all that. So I I don't know what uh how that works for most people, but for some people it works out perfectly well. But this idea of that is a fun thing to play with in fiction. Have you had much response from readers who uh, you know, didn't understand the concept, or like how fun has it been to kind of bring some of these concepts into the larger American culture, if you will?
well, I think what's interesting is I think whatever the origins of a marriage, however two people come together, right? Marriages are work, marriages are hard. And when a marriage ends after going through decades with somebody, it's a very, very challenging thing. And so I think what I have heard from readers and what I've been happy to hear from readers is that even though this is a story about an Indian American family, the themes and what the characters are going through in this novel are things that I think are relatable to a much wider audience, right? Um, the things that people are going through in this book, whether it's divorce or aging or seeing your family members change in ways that you did not expect and you're having trouble dealing with, parenting young children, parenting adult children, all of it's very challenging. And so I think, even though that situation of arranged marriage is unique to this couple and the culture that they came from, I think what they're going through in this book is something that is relatable much more broadly.
Right, right. And I love the fact that you weave so much humor in this book, and um, there's something to be said for moments of levity in stories where you're dealing with very serious subject matter. Sometimes it's a thriller, or some sort of crime novel or something where you take the reader's adrenaline and you just have it pegged out all the time, and then you offer moments of levity to kind of let that emotional toll kind of drop back down, so that then when you hit them with something serious, it feels that much more poignant because you've let the reader experience the full range of emotion. What does humor and levity mean to you, especially in a story that could take on such serious connotations?
Yeah, I've always been drawn as a reader to books that have humor in it, right? That books and stories that are able to combine these elements of humor and heartbreak. And so it was really important for me as a writer. I wanted to incorporate those elements of humor in this novel. But as you say, that balance is tricky to find because there are serious topics in this novel, things like divorce or dealing with aging and um, dealing with past regrets in life and coming to terms with that. And so I think it's important to sort of find that right balance, of humor and tragedy, and trying to figure out what that balance is something that for me took a lot of drafts and revising and rewriting and trying to find that right balance of the two.
You said earlier that that you had worked quite a while on this novel. When did you first begin with the idea and start kind of, seeing if those ideas would morph into a larger story?
Yeah, so I started with the character of Suresh, and when I first started, it was many, many years ago. At the time, I had just graduated from law school. I was working at a law firm, and I um, uh, realized that I wanted to take a fiction writing class for the first time. So I started my first sort of uh, creative writing course, and this was one of my first. For one of my first workshops, I brought in a few pages about this character, Suresh, sort of an older, recently divorced Indian man who was starting to, dip his toe into the waters of online dating, and was sort of had this complicated relationship with his daughter who didn't approve of his online dating efforts, and still had these sort of lingering feelings for his ex-wife who had decided to divorce him. So I started playing around with that character quite a long time ago. But when I started, I thought it was going to be a short story. I didn't know at the time it was going to be a novel. And in fact, I'm not sure at the very beginning I had the confidence to think, oh, I can write a novel. So I was sort of starting with the idea of a short story. I worked on it for a while, and I couldn't quite get it to work as a short story. So I put it away and started working on other things, and then kind of took it out again a few years later because I hadn't forgotten about this character. And then at that point, I started thinking a lot more about, the daughter and the ex-wife, and I started thinking about them a lot and started hearing their voices. And so I started, trying to write a chapter here or there in their points of view, and that's really the point where I knew, okay, this is going to be a novel. This is not a short story. This is going to be a novel. But it was a lot of, stopping and starting and putting it away and for a while and taking it back out, and, just really kind of just feeling my way in the dark, trying to figure out how to write a novel.
Did you at some point in writing the novel, when the world and the characters really become formed in your mind, it's like walking around with these other people in your head all the time, and it it can uh it can be comforting almost that you have these people that only you know about, and you kind of form a relationship with them, and at some point it's almost melancholy to finish the novel, because then their story's finished, or at least this chapter's finished, whatever. um when I guess, when did you really unlock what the core of the story was going to be, and clearly see where the story was going? Was there a moment? Was there something that kind of unlocked that for you, where you're like, okay, now I know how this finishes. I know how to write it out now.
Yeah, I don't know that it was just one moment. I think with each of the characters, each of the four characters, I had those sort of aha unlocking moments, like, oh, I really get you now. I know
Yeah.
exactly who you are. And so I think there was not sort of one single aha moment. I think there were different ones along the way. And so, that's the other thing about writing a book over sort of a on and off over a long period of time. As you reach the end of the process and you're trying to rethink, when when did I realize this? When did I realize that? You're trying to almost, reverse engineer your process.
Right.
And so,
Yeah.
I'm trying to think back if there was one overarching aha moment, and I'm not sure I can pinpoint one. I think there were a bunch of sort of aha moments along the way for each of these characters for
Yeah.
me.
How did you think about what would be a satisfying ending for each of these characters? And was there one character in specific that this character needed to have a satisfying ending, and then the rest of the characters would just kind of fall in line wherever they are? Or was there a conscious effort that each one needed to have something?
Well, not to give too much away, but I think I knew
Yeah,
that
I'm trying to speak in vague terms because I don't want to give too much of the book away.
I think I knew that I didn't want to sort of end it with like a neat little bow on each of the characters' lives, right?
Right.
Because I don't really think that that's the way life works. And so at some level, it is a little open-ended for each of the characters in the sense of what are they going to do next? How are they going to continue on their path of reinvention?
Right.
And so that was intentional. There are definitely things that are resolved by the end, but there's also, you kind of leave in the reader's mind this element of, oh, I wonder what they're doing next. It's sort of not wrapped up with a neat little bow. And
Right.
I knew, I think, quite early on that was the way I was going to leave it.
Yeah.
Um, and I do think, but I will also say, I think one of the things I knew that was sort of important to me was sort of having that image of the grandparent-grandchild relationship factor into the end in an important way.
Yeah.
And I think part of the reason for that is I think there's something very unique about that relationship, the grandparent-grandchild relationship, because it's almost as if a person can take all of these things that they have learned in the course of parenting, right? Their regrets, the things they wish they'd done differently, the things they wish they had paid more attention to when it was happening and enjoyed. And they can sort of channel all of that into this new grandparent-grandchild relationship, where in some
Yeah.
ways they really do get to sort of reinvent themselves and be on this clean slate with this new little person that doesn't have a
Right.
history with them, right? And so, given that so much of this book is about that idea of reinvention, and is it sort of too late to is it ever too late to sort of change your life and think about how to reorient and reinvent your life, given that so much of this book is about that for each of the characters, I knew that I kind of, one of the final images, I wanted it to be about that grandparent-grandchild relationship.
One of the other things that I really love about this book is the way that you um, uh, display the ideas of tradition versus you know modernity, or the family stepping into the modern era versus the tradition that you bring along with you. And the uh the younger generation, how they sort of kind of depend on the parents anchor to tradition, and the way that they kind of react in ways that um that kind of goes against a lot of what they think that they think about life or whatever. This thing about your parents being anchored in something, and even if we stray from that a little bit, we still depend on them being anchored. And does that make sense at all? Like there's this family connection that you sort of depend on. And I love how you sort of play around with that. What was there a conscious effort to kind of play with those ideas, or how did that come about?
Yeah, there is this sort of interplay of, you know, tradition and continuing in sort of these unchanged ways, but also having the flexibility to sort of reinvent and try new things. And so there's that sort of back and forth throughout the book. And in fact, Priya, the daughter character, she's having a really hard time with this idea of her parents changing in
Right.
these ways that she did not expect. A much harder time, in fact, than her brother, who is, you know, more understanding in ways about his parents' post-divorce lives, or there he's sort of cheering them on in ways that she's not. She's having a
Right.
lot more trouble with.
Yeah.
And so, even within the two of them, there are these different reactions to this idea of adhering to the past and being unchanging, or letting these people that you love in your life, your family members, evolve in these ways that you didn't expect.
Yeah. Well, Late Bloomers is available everywhere now. You can go grab it at your local bookstore, or we'll put links in the show notes where you can grab it from Amazon or Audible. The audiobook came out yesterday as well, right, Deepa?
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah. Have you gotten to listen to any of it yet?
I have not yet. I'm definitely going to, but I'm still it's been such an exciting whirlwind. My publication day was yesterday. So I'm
I
sort of
bet.
just like catching my breath.
I'll bet. I'll bet. Well, we're going to put links in the show notes where folks can go grab the book. I love this book. I highly recommend it to everyone. Deepa, if people are just discovering you and want to follow along your journey, is there a place online where they can connect with you and follow along?
Sure. My website is deepavaradarajan.com. My first and last name, all one word, deepavaradarajan.com. And all the information, my social media links, all those things are there. So, yeah.
Great. We'll link that up as well. Deepa, this has been so much fun chatting. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
We are live here in the Storycraft Cafe. I am your host, Hank Garner, and today I am so excited to have Christina Dodd on the show with me. She's got a brand new book. It's called Forget What You Know. And I tell you what, Christina, I always love when a new book comes out because you do things in a way that no one else is doing out there today. And I just love what you bring to, I started to say to the genre, but they're really, your books kind of straddle so many genres. And I love that so much. So welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much. I'm always glad to visit with you.
Thank you. So Christina, I've thought of a question that I've been asking some people lately that's been kind of a lot of fun. In your writing career, and you have written a number of books.
Yes.
And what's the number these days?
About 60, and then short stories and novellas too.
So wow. Over that time, and especially when you were getting started, a lot of new writers get advice from other people that have been down the road before them. Is there a piece of writing advice that sticks out in your mind? Maybe it was a piece of great advice that you look back and you say, "Oh, I'm so happy that someone told me this," or maybe it's so terrible that you just kind of laughingly look back and go, "Why would anyone?" take that advice. Does anything like that stick out at you?
Well, okay, the good advice is Nora Roberts, and she says, "Put your butt in the chair and write." And
100%.
It does better than Nora Roberts. But the bad one, honestly, some guy came on Twitter one time and said, "If you don't write every day, you're not a real writer." And by then I was, 25 years into the career, and it was like, no, that's ridiculous. Absolutely,
right.
And the thing that I tell new writers, and anybody, is as long as you're getting words on the page, that's the right way to write. You're doing it right. I mean, absolutely. The way I've written has changed over the years, and I have friends who write and we all write very differently, and we're all very successful writers. Do what feels good for you, and as long as you get those words out there, then you're okay. And if you can get from the beginning to the end, some writers, really at the beginning concentrate on the first start of the book and can't get any farther. You just have to keep writing.
Well, that advice of, write every day, it sounds like good advice, and it even sounds, it sounds like, well, that's building good habits, and habits are good to, especially positive habits are good to get into. That on the surface, it's like, well, why wouldn't that be good advice? But life doesn't exactly work that way, does it?
No, life doesn't work like that. You have parents who get sick. You have children who get sick. You have to go and spend the whole day at school with your kids. I mean, real life is not like that. You can't.
Right.
And you have to consider it is a job, and you certainly deserve a weekend.
Yeah.
So,
well, and what I've discovered is that the act of sitting down at the keyboard and typing is not exactly writing. And by what I mean by that is that writing happens even when you're not sitting at the keyboard. So try as you might to take a weekend off. a lot of times the story is still working itself out in your mind.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you'll wake up sometime and go, oh, yeah. And
Yeah.
you better get up and write it down because you'll never remember it anymore.
Yeah, I have some friends that are like, I never write anything down because if it's a great idea, it'll be there tomorrow. Well, not in my case. I've had brilliant ideas that
Yes.
just, I can't reach out and grab it again.
My brain, if I don't write it down, it says it's not an important idea and it just goes right out the door. So obviously that if that's the way your brain works, that's fine. But
sure.
Mine, not so much.
The last time we talked, Christina, you told us about how you broke into writing and, you had a child, if I remember right. And, how difficult, I think it started with your first child and you're like, oh, how difficult can be taking care of a child. I'll write a novel while
exactly.
and we all know how that turned out.
Just pure stupidity. I mean, honestly, children are a lot of work. I'm breaking the news to everybody here. And so you're not going to probably do a lot of other things other than raise a child.
Right.
And so many other people are raising children and having another job and trying to write a book. And so you have to salute them. My goodness. So.
Right. Looking back now, how many years ago has it been since you've put out 60 novels or so? How long did it take you to get to this point?
I've been published for 33 years.
Wow.
33 years on February 3rd, but who's counting?
But who's counting? How many things have changed in publishing and writing? And I separate publishing and writing. The technology of writing has changed a lot. Word processors and writing programs are, just amazing now. When I first started writing short stories, I was mostly writing longhand and, that sort of thing. But has the publishing industry changed a lot in that amount of time?
The publishing industry has totally changed. And what changed it, of course, was self-publishing. Once people got to the point where they could publish books as ebooks and on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or wherever, that changed the whole complexion of publishing.
Right.
And you've got traditional publishing now and self-publishing, and you get some really great books both ways. So it's been fascinating. And where 20 years ago I could have told you I knew almost everything about publishing, I don't know anything. Don't ask me. Writing, I always had a computer. I always, it was very early computer. Don't get me wrong, really big and everything. But I've always written on a computer, so that's been the easy way to do it.
Gotcha. When you first broke into writing, what was the genre that you were writing in?
When I started writing, I was reading a lot of romance. I still read a lot of romance. I like romance. Love it. And I read a lot of genre fiction of all kinds. And so I started writing. First, I wrote a historical romance, and I just labored on that for 6 years. I don't even know how many words I had, 200,000, something ridiculous. I mean, it was unbelievable. And if you really want to have a really good laugh, it was a historical romance set in Guatemala. So that one didn't sell. And so then I liked all kinds of writing. And so next wrote a contemporary romance. That one didn't sell either. And then I wrote another historical romance, and that was my first sold book. But the first two, you have to learn how to write. Yeah. And I was a draftsman. I was not a creative writing major or anything like that. And so those are my two learning books. And people say, would you ever publish them? And it's like, oh, no. Oh.
Well, what's interesting is I'll talk to people that, like you, have a couple of novels that they, as you said, learned to write on, and went through the whole process, learned how to get from beginning to end. Maybe that one didn't do the trick, so you write another one. And then there are other people who write a novel and it's not great, but they go back and revise that novel, and they revise and they revise and they revise until that one does sell. What do you think the difference in those two mindsets are? Work on this until it becomes sellable versus starting in another vein altogether.
Um, I think you can certainly do that and work on it and work on it. And I did, obviously, 6 years on the same book. I certainly did.
Well, sure.
But, at some point you have to say, no, it's time to move on. And I certainly did. And, I've had a lot of really good ideas, and through my career, after I was published, I was rejected many times.
Sure.
I put in an idea to an editor and they'd say, no, we don't want that. And, once you've got a level of success, you're not supposed to have that happen, but it doesn't work that way. And you just say, okay, and you move on. You always put the ideas away. You never throw an idea away. And the thing about that is it frequently comes back in a different form, or you get a chance with a different editor who likes it, and you get to write what you want.
Is there such a thing as a bad idea that, maybe this idea just doesn't work and it's just never going to work, and you just put that away and try another idea?
Ideas, yeah, I think you can have bad ideas. But that's a matter of opinion too. If you're writing literary, what's a bad idea in genre fiction is probably a good idea in literary. But I have read books where I thought it was a wonderful idea, a great idea, and they didn't do it well, in my opinion. And I go, I'm going to take this good idea and I'm going to write it my way, and I'll make it good. And I make myself happy with it. And so that's usually a saleable book.
Looking back over your back catalog, it looks like you have mostly written in series in the past.
Yeah, mostly.
Is there something enticing about writing in a series versus writing standalones? I know some people that have written 50 standalones and they're in no way connected. And each time you start a new book, it's, going back to the drawing board. Is there something exciting about writing in series and taking this idea and stretching it out?
It's, of course, as a writer, it's easier if you create a world, which I'm in Gothic right now. It's a town, and we have the same characters. And so it's easier for me. But the main reason I do it, and believe me, I would do it differently if I needed to, readers like it. Readers like the familiarity of being in the same world. It highlights the story that you're telling rather than the characters. And that's really important to make the reader comfortable, to make them happy. That's why Regency is so popular. If you look at Bridgerton, people love it. They know the world. They don't have to worry about what the people are dressed like. They know what it is. They know what the manners are. They know what's expected of people. And it makes the reader happier.
Yeah, with like Regency, at Bridgerton, if you see a certain costume, then you kind of understand the kind of the values of the world and the social structure. And there's a lot of things that come with that, that as the writer, you don't have to explain. The reader kind of brings that with them.
Yes.
I started writing a series a bunch of years back. I created a fictional town in the Mississippi Delta, and I wrote a bunch of stories in this town, and they seem to not be connected, but to me they are connected because they all reside in this place,
in the world,
in this world. And in my mind, I can tell you all the connections between all of these characters. Right. And if you read them, you may not pick up on it, but I do. And I get that same feeling from Gothic in your latest series. Is that kind of what you're doing there?
Yes, it's comfortable. I want people to read the story. I don't want them to worry about the window dressing. And at the same time, you also want, I love a good quirky character, and Gothic is loaded with those. And so it's fun for the reader. in Forget What You Know, I created, first of all, a hero is a former pro wrestler, so that was a lot of fun. And then his mother was just the crankiest old woman in the world. The story is about a divorced couple who are being forced back together, and both mothers just did everything they could to screw up that marriage, and they have both realized they've made a terrible mistake. So you see the cranky old woman coming in to make amends. She's still cranky.
Yeah.
But so she's a lot of fun. She's a favorite reader character.
I love it. So when when it's time to start a new book, what is, if we're talking about a series that you've already created the world for, how do you start figuring out what this story is going to be? What are the elements that you pull in that kind of set the stage?
It's all suspense. One of the elements that I love and that readers love is amnesia, and I frequently use it. You can use it as in Forget What You Know, that she's taken away. Her mother takes her away from her home when she's 4 years old, and her mother says, "Forget what you know." And of course, at 4 years old, that's really easy to do. So she honestly has no idea what her background is. In the book before that, I simply had someone who was hurt very badly, who had forgotten everything. And you can play with the types of amnesia, but it makes it a very interesting story if someone knows they're in danger and at the same time doesn't know why.
Yeah. Gothic is a fictional town, correct?
Oh yeah.
What are you play with a lot of different elements in these books. We've got there's a touch of treasure hunt. There's a touch of psychological suspense. There's a little bit of otherworldliness, that you're expecting something weird to happen, and I don't expect to be able to explain it. There's a bit of those elements.
Right.
How would you describe, if you had to put this in a bookshelf in the bookstore, which I know your books are, but if you were shelving them and not your publisher, where would you say this book lives?
You're either going to go romantic suspense, or you're going to go pure suspense. It is, because I've written romantic suspense, so I do know the difference. You can have a relationship in suspense, but that's not what the dominant story is. And Forget What You Know is more dominantly suspense, and very, a lot of characters. And the focus is, of course, on the heroine and then on the hero, but there's just too much other stuff to be going on to be calling it romantic suspense. So I'd go suspense, but the otherworldliness is simply an element that's a lot of fun. The other thing that makes people not consider me serious suspense is that I have a lot of humor in my books, and people laugh quite a lot. So
yes, and I was going to bring that up in a minute, because this idea of levity, you could say that it can become dismissive for serious suspense readers, whatever that is. But it almost, when you add this element of levity, it almost makes the suspense more suspenseful.
Exactly.
Because when you give the reader a chance to let their adrenaline come down and feel safe, because that laughter makes you feel safe, and then you hit them again, it's almost twice as impactful.
Yes, exactly.
Is that on purpose?
Oh yes. Buffy the Vampire Slayer was out 20 years ago, a long time ago, but they were the ones that taught me that very clever trick, was because it was so amazingly funny. You just roar with laughter, and then the monsters would come, and it was just twice as bad. And so yes, I think that really creates the contrast to make the horrors more horrible, the suspense suspenseful. And and plus I just think that life is funny, so might as well.
You might as well laugh.
Yeah.
Tell me about the character of Zoe. Where did she come from?
Oh, she was she's a complex character. She has a lot of memories
For sure.
to understand, but she also has this touch of magic. She is Okay, when I started conceiving the story, I had to have a character who could stay in Gothic and make her living there. And so I went onto Facebook, because I frequently do this with my readers, and say, okay, if you work from home, and this was during COVID, if you work from home, what do you do? What have you been able to do from your home? And the answers were so fascinating. I mean, I got a list of stuff that people do from home that was just wonderful. But one person said, I'm a flower breeder. I propagate new kinds of flowers. And I was at the time reading a book called Flower Confidential. And I went, bingo. And so that's what the character of Zoe is. She's very connected to the earth. She's very connected to flowers. And she actually has kind of a magical touch with them. And so that adds that element of the unusual to the story, I think, and really a lot of interest.
I love it. Are you a planner? Are you a pantser? Where would you fit in
Oh
that?
no, I definitely I have friends, Susan Elizabeth Phillips, Jane Ann Krantz. They just sit down and start writing, and I'm like, I don't even know how you do it. I would be frozen with fear if I did that. That I would get 80,000 words into it and wouldn't know how to finish it. So I know where I'm going. I don't. I no longer write in a linear manner. That has gone out the door.
Yeah.
I normally write about half of the book now, and then I'm like, I don't know what to do. And so I go and I write the end of the book, which I always know what that is. And by the time I'm done with the end of the book, with the climax and the wrap up of the characters, I always know what to do to connect the two. And that's how I'm writing now. Don't ask me in 5 years what I'll be doing. I don't know.
Do you know the end from the beginning, or do you discover the end as you're?
I know what the end is. Are you asking me, do I know who the bad guy is? No, that's usually I set up my suspects.
Yeah.
And about halfway through, I kind of know who it is. But and I frequently change my mind. So when people say I knew right away, I'm thinking, well, good for you, because I didn't.
Do you write out your plan, or is this just a system of kind of knowing and holding that in your brain?
I have a lot of no, I don't hold. I told you, I already said that. I don't hold anything in my brain. I write out a plan for the story, and I clear it through my editor too. I always make sure that they are willing to accept that particular story, and then I write out a lot of notes. And I continue writing out notes the entire time I'm writing the book.
This idea of submitting a plan to your editor and kind of working out the story ahead of time before writing, that's I'm hearing that more and more from writers, that there's a collaborative effort with their editors beforehand. Is that a new thing or?
No, 30. No. When I started in publishing, and it was only New York publishing at the time, you had to. They didn't know what I could do. They didn't know whether I was going to be good for more than one book, because frequently people are only got one book in them.
Right.
And so, I had to turn in my ideas and talk about it with the editors. The editors, it depends on the editor how invested they are in the story, and but in the end, it's going to be what I want, and not what they want. I edit very well. Don't get me wrong. If I think it's a good idea and they've come out, they're not editors for nothing. They usually have great ideas. Yeah. But in the end, if we're arguing about it, I'm the winner. I'm the author.
Does having a good working relationship with an editor help to keep on a pretty predictable publishing schedule? You hear some writers that there's 6 years between novels, and and most people put out a novel a year, and or something similar to that. Does having that good working relationship ensure that the train stays on the tracks?
Absolutely. It makes sure that you're scheduled to the publishing industry, and yes. But the good thing about that too is if they're not able to schedule you often enough, now you can self-publish something. And I do. I've got short stories and novellas that I put out to fill in the gaps between books. So people have got something to read and they remember me.
Yeah. Your books tend to revolve around a mystery of sorts, and like you said earlier, that you have a series of suspects in mind, and you've written them, and then as you write it, you kind of figure out who done it, so to speak. Does do all of your books kind of work in that way, that there's a mystery at the core of it that you have to solve as you write it?
Every one of them. Every historical romance, every paranormal romance, every romantic suspense, every suspense, everything has a mystery. I don't know how to write a book other than that. I have to have some kind of plot. There has to be something going on underneath that the hero and heroine, or the heroine or the hero, has to figure out. And but that for me is how to write a book. And I know people who can actually write books solely on emotion, and I salute them, but I don't know how to do it.
Gotcha. You mentioned the difference in suspense with a romance versus a romantic suspense. Yeah. For people that don't understand where some of these genre lines fall, what's the difference in?
Well, okay, these things constantly change all the time.
Yeah.
That's all there is to it. The romantic suspense is basically you have a very intense relationship between a hero and heroine who are probably divided by what's occurred as the suspense progresses, or they both have different goals. With a suspense with romance, you could actually pull that suspense out of the story, and you'd still have a really good suspense. But it wouldn't be as interesting. People like a relationship of some kind. You either have a suspense with a lot of friends, or Deanna Raybourn just did one called Killers of a Certain Age. And it's about a group of female assassins. And that's the relationship it's about these longtime friends who are assassins. And it's a suspense. It's a great one. And it's not necessarily male-female or male-male or female-female. It's not romantic. It's just friendship. And that's terribly important too.
Yeah. I tell people all the time that I don't care what genre you're writing in, read a little bit of romance, because there are so many thrillers that I've read that really could use some better relationship storylines. Read a little outside your genre and see what you could bring into from see what other people are doing really well, and try to bring some of that in. It's never hurt anybody.
Before I was published, I worked in a bookstore, and basically you found out what people liked, and we just read widely. We had to. We were recommending books to people, and that's the thing to do. Read every genre, even if you don't like it. Check it out occasionally and see if your tastes have changed, which certainly happens. But you'll just learn something. That's important.
Yeah, absolutely. We got a great question from Paula, who says, "What made you realize that your stories all needed a mystery? Do you read or watch mostly mysteries?"
Well, not mysteries, but suspense. And there's a difference there too. Please don't ask me to define that one. But no, it is what I read. It's always what I read. They always have to have that backbone. And I can read women's fiction, or fiction that is simply about relationships, but I am not as propelled to read those books. That's not the ones I pick up from. If you read the back copy, it's not what I pick up. I tend to read. I want that bit of suspense in there. And there's just almost every book that you read. Some people are very successful with that relationship book, but most books, I think, have a suspense plot of some kind.
Gotcha. Forget What You Know. Is this the third book in this series?
The first novel is Point Last Seen. The second, I wrote a novella. I went crazy.
Okay.
I had no idea what was. I had an idea for a story, and so I wrote a 20,000 word novella. It is out now as an audiobook exclusive, and it will go into the book eventually.
Gotcha.
And then Forget What You Know.
how do you know when a series has reached its end or has fulfilled its potential? You've written a number of series that run 6, 8 books long or
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
and then you start a new series. How do you know when that has kind of lived its life?
I could probably keep one series going forever, especially if it is not about the people, but it's about the place. Um, I really love those place series, but sometimes you just move on. The next book is the next suspense is finished. I'm calling it Never Go Home Again. Whether or not the publisher will call it Never Go Home Again, I don't know. It'll be out next
That's a
month.
whole different
Yeah, it is a whole different
discussion, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah. But it'll be out next March. And this one, Gothic is not the main setting, but it does make a guest appearance. So
Interesting.
it's a nice place to visit, I think.
I love it. I love
It's
it.
kind of like if you like Tolkien, you'd like to visit Middle Earth occasionally.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I hope I hope that you stay in Gothic for forever. I love this setting, and I hope that that you stay there as long as possible. The new book is called Forget What You Know. Christina, I know you've got other things to do today, so thank you for joining us. We're going to put links to this book in the show notes to make it easy for folks to find. It's out in hardback and Kindle and audiobook.
Ebook and audiobook and hardcover and trade paperback. And yes, absolutely.
Paperback and hardback at the same time?
Yeah. Well, I sell very well to libraries. And so it's that
That's
library
awesome.
market that they are aiming at hardcovers to.
That's awesome.
And then please come to my website, ChristinaDodd.com, and sign up for my newsletter. You'll enjoy it. I actually get fan mail for my newsletters.
I love it. I love it. Christina, thank you so much for taking time to come on and join us today.
Thank you. Great to see you, Hank. I hope to see you again soon.
Absolutely. That's our episode for today. There's so much more to come as we talk with authors about the craft of writing, but also the business of publishing. Be sure to subscribe to the Storycraft Cafe podcast in your favorite podcast app to never miss an episode. The Storycraft Cafe is made possible by Dabble. Writing a book is challenging. Your writing tool shouldn't be. Dabble is an easy-to-use online writing tool packed with helpful features that allow beginning novelists and published authors to create amazing stories. Visit us at dabblewriter.com and start your free trial. Thanks for listening.